got two exceptional speakers in this next session, and also myself, for you to enjoy. I don't think either of my speakers need much introduction, actually, but Dirk Friel is a former professional cyclist, and also from Training Peaks, which I think is something of an internet phenomenon when it comes to power measuring devices and analysis of training and performance data. So I'm sure that there's probably not anybody in this room that's not already familiar with Training Peaks. So without little further ado, what I'll do is hand you over to Dirk, who's going to talk more on the practical side of power meters and training. Dirk.
Thank you very much. I'm the chief evangelist, as you can see, and that's because I like to hire people smarter than myself. I'm the only non-scientist in here, probably. And back in Boulder, Colorado, where Training Peaks has its headquarters, we have 54 employees. And I started out kind of being the one guy doing it all. And what I love doing now is actually presenting, talking to coaches, working with teams, national governing bodies throughout the world to try and help them become more efficient at tracking the training data, to track, analyze, and plan. And so really the way Training Peaks began, first of all, I'd like to ask, how many of you in here are coaches and you coach cyclists? All right, super, it's probably more than half of you, super. Well, I was a coach. My family business is coaching. My father is, he was the scientist of the family, Joe Friel, and he started coaching endurance athletes in the early 80s. So come 1997, it's time for me to start to coach along with my father. I joined the family practice, if you will, and back then, it was using the fax machine and email attachments. And essentially, every single day I'd come in the home office, below the desk would be a pile of paper just piling up below the fax machine. I would fax out training schedules, and athletes would fax back their training logs. They would also fax back their power meter files, their polar files, their this and that file. So I'd have to have 6 different programs open along with a piece of paper on the ground and put a 3-hole punch in it and put it in a 3-ring binder, and then our whole entire wall was full of paper. And I had data scattered all over the place, but I needed a place to aggregate it all. So I envisioned one system that was web-based, that coaches and athletes could access all training data from anywhere, no matter where they were traveling to. So, I had this concept. It's, hey Dad, it's 1999 here, let's get with it. There's this thing called .com, the internet. And he's like, well, go ahead and try and make it happen. And I was not a programmer. Luckily, the best man at my wedding and a guy I raced with was the only programmer I knew in the entire world. His name is, appropriately enough, Gear, like G-E-A-R, like a bike gear. So Gear Fisher and I and my father started Training Peaks in 1999. And Gear Fisher is now our CEO, and we're still doing the very same thing we did from day one. We develop software to help coaches run successful businesses and athletes reach their goals and dreams. We work with Team Sky, Tinkoff Saxo, Orica Green Edge, MTN Quebeca, many other teams, as well as British Cycling, USA Cycling, Cycling Australia, etc. So I do a lot of travel. I go to a lot of training camps. I go to a lot of national team training camps around the world throughout the year. And so this is somewhat of my experience in the evolution of tracking training, if you will, within a professional cycling scene. This is, I love this. This is Kristen Armstrong. I asked her to sign a poster of mine, and she said, thanks for keeping me honest. I think that's what we're all here to do, right? We're here to help our athletes compete in an honest manner and to reach their true potential. Here's another athlete that leverages Training Peaks as well as just technology in general and coaching. So this is 2007 in Mallorca. This is Marco Pinotti on T-Mobile. This is the very first training camp I ever attended. This is the year 2007. I started the company in 1999, but yet this is the very first training camp I ever went to. We didn't have any competitors. The sport of cycling culture started to change around 2007. We built our business on the sport of triathlon up until that point. The culture of triathlon was just, it's a blank slate. They didn't have the traditions. They didn't, have anything to really compare against, and historically, if you will. And triathletes are much more likely to hire a coach. In our market research, that, as far as we can tell, triathletes are 3 to 4 times more likely to hire a coach than a cyclist. A lot of people will say, well, triathlon, that's much more complicated. You have 3 sports. But you know what? They don't have to do sprints. They don't have to, for the most part, do anaerobic work, work within their races. They don't have tactics in terms of riding a peloton and attacking and doing team strategy, etc. So, in a lot of respects, cycling is much more complicated than triathlon. But cyclists don't hire coaches. Why is that? I think that culture has started to change. We started to see that in the mid-2000s, maybe seven or so years ago. We started to see this cultural change. T-Mobile brought us in because, yes, they had been tracking data. Power meters are not new. They've been around for decades, and thanks to Uli, I think he's in here, in large part because of Uli and SRM, power meters have been around for decades. But, the true value of a power meter, I believe, is the data you can collect from it and analyze afterwards. And then from that, you can make decisions on tomorrow's training. T-Mobile was tracking training, but it wasn't efficient. They were relying on email attachments. They have 30 riders. That's more than 200 files every single week. There's no way they can manage 200 email attachments every single week going to, let's say, one team doctor, and then how is he supposed to disseminate that information out to the performance staff? So they actually were one of the first teams to hire a true performance staff, and they had, many teams prior to T-Mobile had trainers and team doctors, but T-Mobile really wanted to access all the training for all the riders to try and monitor every single rider as best possible. So that was our first entry point into professional cycling. And this is the way we envision cycling teams working. Every single individual, hopefully, is following a framework of deliberate practice. I'm not here to debate the 10,000-hour rule. That's not any part of what I'm here to discuss. But I believe every single athlete and coach should think in terms of this framework. Every single athlete should set a goal, along with their coach, ideally, right? They should have expert instruction, perform perfect practice, and get immediate feedback. Now, this can be on a micro level or a macro level. On a micro level, we know you need to improve your threshold by, let's say, 25 watts. So tomorrow's efforts are 2 times 20 at 360 watts, 5-minute recoveries, whatever it might be. That's a micro goal. Then they go out and that's also the expert instruction, sorry. The athlete goes out and does perfect practice. With the help of a power meter, we now can actually collect and see how well did they actually hit the goal for the day, and then we can get back to them with immediate feedback. And the process effectively just repeats itself every single day, every single year. The more this can be implemented, the better results we will see from our athletes. But it's absolutely amazing how many athletes don't actually have this framework as a part of their training regime. They don't have expert advice, they don't get immediate feedback, and they don't have clear goals. And that's an essential element to advancing as a cyclist. So again, practical application of training. Track, analyze, and plan. Again, it's amazing how many actual professional athletes are not tracking, analyzing, and planning. And I don't expect athletes to actually do each one of these. They should work harmoniously with their coach to get this triangle completed, track, analyze, plan on a daily basis. Likewise, when we look at professional cycling teams, they should incorporate science, coaching, and training. And that's what we built our business on. We focus on bringing the science to the coaching experience, which can then be tailored to the training, and that repeats. the science should inform the coaching. So how well is your staff of sports scientists interacting with the coaching and performance team, right? Most of the time that's one and the same. But is there actually true coaching going on? Does every single rider on your team go home and know what they're supposed to do tomorrow? Or is it, hey, training camp just wrapped up, your first race is 3 weeks from now, good luck, we'll see you in 3 weeks. That's actually how it exists on the majority of teams. The riders leave training camp, they go home, and they have some general rules, like, maybe I should do 23 hours this week, but there's a million different ways to perform 23 hours, right? So, look at your programs and see, is there actually true coaching going on within your programs? And then the training can come back and inform the coaching, which then informs science. And a lot of times, the coaching is ahead of the science. And the science has to try and catch up, like with SFR, we just saw, right, this presentation. Is it effective? More than likely, yes. We don't know why. Coaches prescribe it anyways. Science hasn't told us why yet. I'd like to read one excerpt here from Bradley Wiggins' book. And if you happen to have this book called My Time, this is page 94. Bradley Wiggins writes, using Training Peaks, Tim would work out my training for the day, times, power outputs, cadences. He would upload it, and I would get a notification telling me to go and read it in an email. It's a far cry from the mileage chart that they used to print in the Cycling Weekly center spread at Christmas every year, which I colored in religiously until I was about 16. So the schedules came in week by week. I just did exactly what I was asked. Then each day I downloaded the SRM file from the box on the handlebars, put it into Training Peaks for Tim to look at. For once, I wasn't interested in the details. I had 100% faith in what Tim and Shane put on paper. I gave them total responsibility. That in turn made them think about it, and that is where a lot of my faith in them came from. So the athlete first starts with accountability. How much accountability do your riders have to the team to report their training? He had a lot of, he was accountable to the team to report what he did every single day. But in turn, it created accountability back to the athlete. The coach was accountable to the athlete as well to get back to them with immediate feedback. The better you can make that loop, the better the trust you gain between athlete and coach. You get more open, you explore new concepts, new ideas, the athlete starts to think and get educated, and they come back from the training ride with new concepts and ideas for the coach to experiment with, right? Things get tailored and they get refined, and you produce a better rider. So again, back to that model of deliberate practice, it all starts there. Collecting data, has certainly become much, much easier. This is actually not a super great slide because in today's world, all you need is this device, and a power meter. I haven't downloaded a single file in the last 5 weeks, and every single one of my rides is collected in Training Peaks, right? This Garmin device talks to this phone by Bluetooth. I come in my garage. My phone doesn't even have to be on me. It might be in my on my kitchen counter. Grab my phone, turn it on. It recognizes the Garmin. I hit upload. Finish. Done. That's how hard it is to download devices now. I know SRM is working on a device which will have Wi-Fi and Bluetooth, I believe. That process can become even easier. Imagine riding into your garage, your device recognizes the home network, and it says, do you want to upload? You say yes, finished, no more uploading. So it's actually becoming so much easier to upload devices. That really isn't much of a hindrance once the next generation devices come out. Right clicker. This is our upload history since 1999. We have nearly 1.6 million files are uploaded to Training Peaks every single month right now. So this is effectively doubling right now at a rate of every 2 years. It's probably going to start doubling every year now that all this new technology is coming out. The first file we uploaded to the web, we never ever saw the ability to analyze data online in 1999. Early 2000, we uploaded our first power file, and it was like world-changing for us. Now it's a commodity. You can upload power data to 100 different sites for free. So now it becomes, what do we do with the data? This is another cool device. This is the Garmin Verb new camera. This is a group ride I do every single week in Boulder, and you can see my power, heart rate, speed, cadence. You can actually see where I am on the course in the top right. Imagine using this for team time trial recon training, or going out and practicing a time trial, recording it, and then playing it during warm-up on the rollers, at the team bus. Pretty amazing new technology coming along. We have a lot of advanced training metrics. Wiggins actually writes in this book about how he changed his training based upon the concept of leveraging training stress score. So we have a lot of advanced training metrics that don't have to do with individual workouts. Imagine seeing the world of training holistically. Every single ride counts, not just the hard rides. The easy days count just as much as the hard days. The days off the bike actually count just as much as the hard days. A lot of these advanced training metrics have to do with data over time and chronic training load, acute training load, training stress balance, and modeling future fitness. Trying to make training more race-specific. This is Chris Anker Sorensen. He got second in a stage in the Pyrenees a couple years ago. And at the end of the day, we need to analyze the racing so that we can make the training more race-specific. I use this as an example of, historically, riders would only record or share with their coaches the hard days. Hey, look what I did today. And that was the only file they would send all week. It was like the one hard, really good day. That's a black and white picture. When we start to track every single day's files and paint a holistic view of the training, at the end of the year, we can actually look back and see the self-portrait that the rider has generated for themselves. This is 3 years worth of data from Juan Antonio Flecha. The first year is 2011, 2012, and 2013. In this year, this is the Tour de France, this is the Vuelta, here's the Tour de France and the Vuelta. So this is every single day's, this is weekly training stress score for 3 years, okay? Another way to look at this very same data is time by power zone. So again, Juan Antonio Flecha, here's the Tour, the Vuelta, and the Vuelta. Time in heart rate zone. He didn't start tracking his training until the latter part of his career because of the protocols that Team Sky put into place. And he felt that that actually extended his career. So he actually learned a lot from the data that could help him survive a few more years in the Pro Tour level and actually produce very good results. This is every individual day's TSS score are these red dots. And we can see the trends throughout the year. Here's the off-season, again, Tour de France, Vuelta, Tour, and Vuelta. So every single rider is going to paint their own picture. There's no one perfect framework for a rider to follow. But once you have a complete year's worth of data, that data set becomes infinitely more powerful because you have something to compare against going into year 2 and beyond. This is comparing 2011 to 2013 as peak power curve. We can see even out here in 2013, he was still setting new peak power records at his final year of being professional. And now we're starting to do future modeling. So this is a rider from the preparation phase up through the base phase. And this is his first, the Tour of the Basque Country is here. And we can model out what will his fitness, fatigue, and form be. And lastly, the next generation. We're going to have athletes coming through that can map out their entire career from, let's say, age 15 on. They'll be collecting data, and when they come to you at the Pro Tour level, it'll be an amazing wealth of information to actually fine-tune their training with. I think I went over time, so I should probably pass it along from here.
You were bang on there. Thank you very much. And now I would like to introduce to you Mikel Zabala, who is the Director of Performance for the Movistar team, and recent winners at Giro d'Italia. Hopefully you can repeat the same level of performance in the Tour. And Mikel also is based at the University of Granada and leads what's possibly the world's only cycling science course there at a postgraduate level too. So Mikel, if I hand over to you and I'll just set your slides up.
Hello everybody. Well, first of all, I would like to thank for the opportunity of being here with such a level of presenters and people involved in cycling. And I have to apologize because of my English. Let's see what happens. Well, I'm stand-up. Because the difference between Dirk and me is quite big. Let's see if not in the content. Congratulations for your presentation. It's really interesting, and it's focused on the panoramic view of what's power and what's its role in nowadays cycling. Now I'm going to be practical. I think I will just talk about a few indexes and small amounts of data, and I will try to put some examples that we have developed, we took in our team. So it's about how we can use power data in a team. First of all, the philosophy where we started developing a concept, because sometimes, you know, the old school, I do agree with Dirk that the Operación Puerto was a big change in some mentalities, and maybe this led to the change in 2007 to this kind of different mentality. This is why some coaches we appeared in the teams, and there's people like Zabala in Dirk or Marco, different coaches that we try to find our place in nowadays cycling. And I think we should thank to UK cycling also for this change in mentality. And we developed also a journal of Science and Cycling that will publish all the abstracts and posters in around a week, because we want to post them individually, so the search is improved. And in our philosophy, of course, power data is there. There are many principles in which we can use power data management, but it's more than this. We cannot go into the forest and analyze tree by tree. We must see the forest itself, and once we know what a forest is, we can analyze each tree and each detail of each tree. So this is the philosophy each coach should have to better suit with this data management. Otherwise, it's going to analyze trees and nothing else. And of course, in these principles, you can see that this cyclist or cycling 2.0 is nothing new. It's common sense. But sometimes in the past there was not common sense in cycling, and these were the results. Of course, to have this panoramic view of everything, we have to share information, but there's a lot of information every day, as you could see in Dirk's presentation, and we must do in a smart manner, in a smart way. So thanks to the technology we can do this, but we have to respect what we call the functional threshold data, or there is a functional threshold power, and the same happens with the data for the cyclists, and it's individual. Otherwise, they get crazy, most of them. And I like this picture because cyclists, athletes are like popcorn. But the difference is that we don't have 3 packages of popcorn. It's damaged, well, another one. No, you can't do that in a season. So you must take care about the training stimulus, the training response, and this is why technology is so helpful. And there are many aspects to consider. And power data is also involved in the skills also involved in tactics, in psychology, in pacing strategies, in how I can suffer more, or in which occasions, in fitness, of course. So the thing is how we can use it in the different contexts. There are many variables, sometimes too much variables. You have a look at the Grammy device, you start selecting the variables you want to use, you have many pages of indexes, and at the end you are all the time looking at the stem, like Chris Froome. I think all the time looking at the data. But most of them can be integrated in the same device, so at the end it's just a matter of selecting them properly. Of course, for this panoramic point of view, we need to respect the training principles that we all know about them, but most of the times are lost, are forgotten. And maybe the most important one, or respecting one by one, but one that sometimes is forgotten, is the pedagogic principle of training. We have to teach the athletes, and at the end they know so much, they know a lot about power data, and this can help a lot making decisions during racing, not just training, but also during the races. Sometimes they can be helped by power data. Although I will say that we cannot be slaves of data. Never. We have to think smart. So we have the time of the exercise, the intensity of the exercise, the frequency that changes from acute work to chronic work because of the frequency, and the type of or mode of the exercise. So we get at the end different indexes. One fosters based on RPE, train based on heart rate, or train stress score based on power. So a lot of indexes, a lot of information that at the end we should remember that everything is coming from here. The force applied in the pedal and the guidance, well, the angular velocity of the crank. That sometimes is a matter that power is everything, so independently of my RPE, my feelings, my heart rate, and so on, I must follow the target data or power data, and this could lead to different problems. Because variables are different, of course, but are complementary. It's like cooking. Ingredients are necessary for some dishes, like salt, for example. But an excess of salt, I think, for some people is worse than for other people. But an excess is bad for all of us. So with their characteristics, we must know how to put them in context. If the heat stress is so big, now I have to think about heart rate in a different manner. So I think the key point is to complement, to take both, not just power, but those that are useful, and teach the cyclist to analyze them and to put them in context. I don't like very much lactate. I think it's expensive. I think it's delayed. I think it's just a few data, but it can be useful for some tests as well. Some coaches are slave or lactate, or they do think if you take lactate measures you are a better coach, and it's not necessary like this. So we should follow some steps. First, description, of course, and quantification, familiarization, and then we can start obtaining these individual training zones to start making better plans. But there is much more than making plans. With the use of the appropriate information, we can get many more uses. Of course, there's a critical point that is the critical power, or it's called in different ways, but the power you can maintain for 1 hour as the general description or concept. And once we have this critical point, you can develop the training zones, and these zones should be updated but not by means of more and more tests, but taking the appropriate information from races or from some specific trainings, the matches that is called in training peaks. So which test? This is a good question. There are many tests. There is no a single test. There is no the best test. So it depends on the rider itself, on the necessities, the characteristics. Not the same for Andrea Greipel, or for Sprinter, or for Cavendish, than for Nairo Quintana. Maybe a 30-second swing gait test or a peak power test makes sense for the sprinter, but not so much for the climber. I don't want to say that we can do a peak power test with Nairo Quintana, of course, but maybe not with the frequency or the usefulness for the sprinter. So laboratory or field? Well, mainly field. Why? Because we are all the time in the field, on the field. Mainly field. Sometimes, of course, laboratory tests, but it depends. Short tests, longer tests, as I said. Of course, from the short test to the more endurance-based test, maximum power test, less than 6 seconds to reach muscle fatigue. Maybe if it's in the field, different years to get the real peak power, why not? In the same place, taking into account the context, the temperature, the speed of the wind, wind speed, and so on. Wind gait test that is really useful, especially for the sprinters, to get the time to the peak power, the fatigue index, and so on, taking into account how we are measuring. It's not the same in a load Excalibur than in a scientific SRM. They are completely different. So we have to compare appropriately the data, how were they taken. 3 minutes test that was initially developed recently by Ivan Hatalo and colleagues. It must be an all-out in a specific condition situation. So take all of them with caution, all of them. The 20 minutes functional threshold power test, but be careful, it's not the same uphill than in the flat. Maybe a climber can reach a difference of around 30 watts more in uphill comparing with a flat. This doesn't appear in the literature. There are not a lot of researches, but we know this from experience. Or in a roller, which is different depending on the situation, the position, inspiratory muscles, and so on. 2 30 minutes tests. It could be too stressful, but maybe it makes sense to put under stress the cyclist, but not every day, of course. So 20 minutes test is suitable for most of the high charge, high load trainings, so it's quite easy to do. Not the largest, as for example the 1 hour test, that sometimes it could make sense when you are preparing a time trial, long time trial, and you can get more specific data, because sometimes the 20 minutes test can overestimate the functional threshold power. This is why we try to take out not just the 5% of the average power of the 20 minutes. If the rider is not fit, it's at the beginning of the season, or it's a low level rider, we should take maybe around 7-8% of the average. Incremental test, field and or laboratory. Well, if it's on the field, if you depend on lactate, at least 5 minutes ramps should be okay. I don't like very much this kind of tests. I know they are coming from the past. We replicate them sometimes because of repetition, because they were done in the past. But I think we must be practice. Otherwise, riders are over the functional threshold data or data threshold. This is just an example of the peak power, time to peak power, and so on, the territory thresholds and to the related power, but it's not the same, the power in the load Excalibur and the power in the SRM or in the power to max. So In fact, it's not the same, the power in the SRM and in Pioneer, for example. So we should take everything into account, as well as to confirming all the data in field test, if we're starting in lab test. But the main and the best test is competition. This is what we do think. This is just the references of the 3 minutes all-out cycling test, that we are using them. We are trying to better understand this test, but we are still being cautious with it. This is just an example of the training zones you all know that could be changed. First, mainly because of the sensitivity of the rider, because the previous zones could be doubled in each zone, the down or up side of each zone. But it depends on the language you negotiate with the rider. At the end, it's a matter of language. Of course, based on physiology, that must make sense. I don't say this is good or the previous one is better. It depends on each rider, and the key point is that it must take into account the physiological principles. These are the most common and the basic indexes that Dirk mentioned. Normalized power, I think it was a really good idea. Another thing is that the formula should be improved. The formula must be improved in statistical terms, or in the terms of analyzing the data. I think it's quite easy to improve this formula, and we are working on it. We will talk about it and money later. Intensity factor, of course, to put the exercise itself in terms of my capability, or which percentage I'm exercising, and of course taking into account time, how long. It's okay, 300 watts, your functional threshold power is 300, it's 100%, but how long? 1 hour? If it's more, the functional threshold power should be updated. And this is a correlation we made with many variables. Sorry, it's in Spanish, but just to point out that we don't need to be slaves of power in terms of a training stress score in relation to the TRIMP. You see the relation, not the concordance, but the relation. It's really high. So it's much better to train with the power meter, no doubt, and it's necessary. Well, not necessary, but it's almost necessary in the use with elite athletes. But take care with the indexes. This is a simplistic point of view, just to see the numbers properly. But RPE getting the same results, 720, with RPE 12 or 16. It doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense to exercise at 150 beats per minute for 1 hour and to get almost the same value, 9,000, 9,010, with 170 beats per minute and 53 minutes. This is a simplistic point of view, that's to see the data, but in the background this is happening. And something happens as well in the training stress score, because sometimes we get a value, but how we got this value. So at the end, a software is not going to change the good coach. A bad coach can be changed by that plant. No problem. But there is no a single software that can change a good coach. It's a matter of paying attention and looking behind the data many times. This is why we started also thinking about normalizing heart rate. Why not? It's not the same half an hour, 150 beats per minute, continuous running, or making interval or series in acidosis. It's nothing similar. So this is why also Polar and this kind of companies should take this into account, and as in the same way Garmin is using this reach indexes. I think this is basic, and they are sometimes still with the percentage of maximum heart rate instead of heart rate reserve. So it's crazy. This is an example, 150, but constant or series. Or developing new indexes, not taking into account just power, but also why not RPE or heart rate in an integrated manner, so that at the end we can get a much better view of the training stress and so on. These are just normal values for each category to know where we are. Functional threshold power of 6 watts per kilo, it's like the magic number. Above this, for the functional threshold power, some authors say it's not normal. Well, we have to be cautious also with these interpretations. And the question is how many watts and for how long. So you can follow some Twitter accounts to learn a lot, not just books and scientific papers, also people based on the field that are doing a great work like Second Power Lab or AMATP. This is just the follow-up of the functional threshold power, the power profile from the shortest to the largest time amount. We can take it into account to make the recoveries higher or bigger or not, depending on the percentage of decrease in relation to the third repetition we lose. This is myself, because I try to test everything, the devices, but also the suffering. Coaches sometimes forget suffering, and you can put in the paper whatever you want, that at the end sometimes it's rubbish. And this is a sample of a Johnny Mallory, 25 minutes riding in a Tintin trial, average power of 412, normalized 445, 11 times higher than 500 watts in 30 seconds, during 30 seconds, and 3 times higher than 600 watts. Data, but we have to understand this kind of data, sometimes to make the order of the appearance and where they do need to push harder or not. This is Lobato in the Milan-San Remo that was 4th, analyzing the different situations and phases of the race, and at the end maybe you don't need more than 1,100 watts of peak. Sometimes it's much more than enough. Cavendish is not characterized by a very high peak power value, but you must also take into account the track, aerodynamics, the position, the skills, many other things. So this is the peak power that was close to 1,000. This is Alejandro Valverde in País Basque, when was attacking Contador. I think the most reliable data, I think that was 13 seconds, 850 watts as an average, and a peak power at the end of more than 1,000 watts. But sometimes after 4 or 5 hours of exercising with a very high normalized power and spending a lot of energy. So I think it's really interesting sometimes to test in fatigue, because it makes more sense. This is a famous data last year when Cancellara was beaten by Sagan, and well, you can see that the values were really amazing. But there are also a lot of uses, like in the wind tunnel, where power is everywhere, because we are producing power all the time. Different is if we are measuring it or not, but in the wind tunnel, in the Dark to Zero, or in Granada here, we are also measuring performance in terms of power. But it's not just power, it's how you optimize this use. So we need to go to the field and to take into account other variables, skills, track. This is Valverde in the last Spanish championship, that was the first in an amazing performance. that give us a lot of hopes for this Tour de France. He was not using power. He was learning in the Spanish Championships. He's 34, but he's still learning. This is the attitude. He learned from the past, of course, and he's still learning. And sometimes you must teach him not to be a slave of the power data and to be free. Otherwise, we make robots, and at the end they don't have the data and they get lost. This is really bad. This is like a curiosity. Yesterday, Juan Rodriguez presented the influence of crank length and these values of Alejandro in 2012, 2013, and this year. So the cadence has increased in 10 reps per minute. The wattage is the same, but the difference could be at the end of the race, maybe in relation to muscle glycogen storage. So sometimes research is behind the reality, and this is how it must be. Sorry. Well, the previous one was just to explain that power, yes, also for the warm-ups, but RPE is more important than watts in this kind of situations. This is data in the car to give immediate feedback in the time trials, just as information, because you have to be flexible. You have to let the rider to innovate, to feel free to go harder, to push harder or not, or to set a given pace when they need to work, and they know that given a pace, given a wattage, the work is done. Of course, all the time with the feelings and sensations. So some practical advices to finish. Remember to reduce 5% to the 20 minutes functional threshold power test just when the rider is fit, and reduce until maybe 8, 9 if the rider is not fit or at the beginning of the season. The field test may not be the same developing uphill or flat conditions. Use power in relation to RPE, heart rate when possible. Train pacing also with the power feedback and make a posteriori analysis. Be cautious with train Foster or train stress scores. With all of them, common sense must be behind everything. The view of the forest is the main thing, and then you can go into the details. Respect this individual threshold data or data threshold, I don't know which is better in English. And the pedagogic principle is really important. Select the appropriate test, data and indexes for each rider's interest. There is not the best test. Analyze power data in relation to other variables, the aerodynamics, pacing tactics, RPE feelings, and performance. At the end, we are looking for performance. Sometimes the wattage is incredible, your functional threshold, yes, but what happens in the road? Which is your position? Which is the time in the time trial? Sometimes we get lost. Let the rider to be himself. Sometimes you can be surprised that sometimes 2 + 2 are not 4, and don't be a slave of this power data, avoiding what I read in your great book, Jobson's and Hopker's book, that they call it's called paralysis by analysis. That it's sometimes really hard. So thank you very much, and I hope to say interesting things.
Thank you very much, Mikel. I feel really guilty to take over from Mikel for just a couple of minutes, because I think we could have listened to both Dirk and Mikel for a full hour. But what I'll try and do for just a couple of minutes is to present a completely different perspective altogether. Mine has no application at all. It's entirely academic and theoretical. It has therefore no solutions either. But what I hope to do is to perhaps promote a quick look at where things might go, and also a call for collaboration as well. I want to try and leave a couple of minutes for questions, and I also want to try and finish on time too. So I'm going to cherry pick from my slides if at all possible. So forgive me if I skip through my slides rather quickly, just to pick out a few key points. the first thing I wanted to say is that I think we've reached a level now where we can model cycling from a mechanical point of view really quite accurately. And working with Patrick Cangley on his PhD, and I know some people here have seen his model before, he's essentially assembled using MATLAB a full model of a bicycle and a rider from all its component parts, more or less, so that actually what he can do is produce a model that will move something like a normal bicycle on any particular course that you choose to design it for, and each individual component can be altered and specified as you like. Although Patrick produced this a couple of years ago, and we're very keen on collaboration, we've done only a little bit of work with a couple of different bodies. So if people think that this model is something that will be of interest to them, then please do get in touch, because we'd love to see it being applied in a range of different ways. The key thing that I wanted to say about this, I was hoping it will get to the end of the animation, I think is coming any second now. I can't speed it up. There we go. Right, okay, we're just about there. Is that that's the mechanical side, but the real challenge, I think, is how we train that model. And I think that moving forwards, the next challenge for us is to try and work out how we can input an algorithm that actually enables us to take a mechanical model like that and demonstrate the training process. I think at the moment, the situation that we're in is one where the studies that we do don't enable us to mathematically describe that training process. So in a way, although I completely agree with what Dirk and Mikel have said in terms of the practical application, from a theoretical point of view, I think the next step forward is actually to try and do some of those things that they're saying are very heavily data-driven and are not the ways to treat riders. But in terms of understanding, I think that might be a very useful and insightful way forward. A couple of key points that I'd like to make about how this might happen. And sorry, I'm just trying to pick out the key points here. Is that there are two preoccupations that I think a lot of our work around training and performance and what modelling work has been done, there are two preoccupations which I think may potentially be leading us astray at the moment. And they are our preoccupation with physiological models and trying to model things from a physiological basis, rather than to let the data talk. And also our other preoccupation on trying to predict performance. And so just for a couple of minutes, I'll see if I can explain that in a little bit more detail. So I think the real opportunity here is the wealth of data that we're generating. And it was tempting to say that Uli suggested the way forward this morning was that what we'd be able to do soon is to have two riders racing out on a course, and at the end they just touch each other to download their corresponding power meters, look at the power files and decide who's won. I'm not arguing that we necessarily go that far, but what I am saying is that now the availability of data is potentially so ubiquitous that we can use that to our advantage, perhaps to better understand the training process and to start to reverse engineer from the data more understanding about the training itself. The challenge, I think, I try to summarise here. The key points are that we need to be able to describe training sessions from a numerical point of view. So we need to be able to work out what that input is from a mathematical or statistical process. We need to be able to conceptualise the training process in the same way from a numerical or mathematical perspective. And then use that model to optimise training. Now, if we can optimise training, then we can enhance performance. So that's why I'm arguing we don't necessarily need to worry about performance itself, because if we get training right, then performance will improve. Similarly, the final point then is that we really need to learn how to manage and make sense of large training data sets. And I think that's really where the big challenge is, and why I think this is something that will have to happen as a collaboration and cooperation between different athletes, coaches, scientists, if we're really to do this effectively. So I'll skip this slide, and also, yes, this one too, sorry. I'm nearly there, sorry. Okay. So just to try and give you a little feel for where I'm coming from with this. Over the past year I've been on study leave, and I've been working not so much with power data, but actually with runners' GPS data. in order to try and develop these further. Bless you. And my ambition was to come here today and to be able to give you something of a presentation based around power and the analysis that I've been doing. But sadly, research doesn't work to a tight timetable, and we simply haven't made the sufficient advances to be able to do that today. But what I did want to do was to say that essentially the challenge is very similar. We're taking this very noisy signal and trying to work out how to make sense of this mathematically, and then how to do that sequentially with a number of training sessions, so that we have perhaps a collection of a month or even a year's worth of training data that we're assembling to describe that in some kind of mathematical way. And my sort of last point to try and illustrate where I'm coming from with this and where the challenge is that if we were to very much simplify the training data. So here's an example of a simulated training data set from, say, a single session. We might start with something like this. Typically what we're doing at the moment is we're chunking up our data into bins like this. So we're making it discrete, discontinuous data sets. And as soon as we do that, we're losing our ability to work with that data mathematically. And the reason that we're doing that is because we're trying to make sense of it from a physiological perspective. If instead we let go of that and we say, well, let's just try and work with it from a numerical perspective, then maybe we can look at the data in a more continuous manner so that that same data set looks something like the one on the right. In actual fact, if we extended that data set, so we've got a very limited number of seconds here in my simulation, and so a very limited number of observations. Over a longer period of time, it might look something more like a normal distribution curve or something along those lines. But the key bit here is that we can describe this data now from a mathematical perspective, and we can start to look at what's happening in terms of the training going in from a mathematical perspective, and then look at what the implications are for that from training. So it may actually then be possible to dissect out which bits of training are effective. So my concluding remarks are that I think modelling training and actually trying to make sense of all that data we're gathering now is our future challenge, if you like. That collaborative projects where we can perhaps work together to collect good quality data sets with a number of different observations, both in the lab and the field, or under controlled situations, could be the way forward. And that those initial optimization solutions need not necessarily be tied to either performance or to physiological models, but actually just trying to understand from the training data itself which bits of training are working more effectively. So I'm sorry I have run over by a minute there, but I hope that I've given you some food for thought and left a couple of minutes for you to ask Dirk and Mikel a couple of questions. Thank you. So we're running fairly close to time. Could I just ask, perhaps, is there a question for Dirk in particular? And then I'll ask it again also for Mikel too. Okay, any questions that anyone has at all? At the back there.
Just a quick one for Dirk. I know there's been a delay on WKO version 4.
Yeah. When is it? Sorry, when is it coming out?
When and what do we get it? What's fantastic about it?
Yeah, there's new science coming out in it. It'll help you predict changes in threshold. It'll show functional reserve capacity. So the amount that you have above threshold, the amount of energy you have in reserve above threshold. When, I hope that, coming this fall. Well, I'm not managing that project, so you can't. I'm not sure exactly, but it's definitely coming this year, and it's much different in terms of how we're doing the user interface. Obviously, some Mac and PC, but a lot of new science is coming out in it, which should do a little bit more of the intelligence and do a little more thinking on your behalf. So fingers are crossed. I have a version right now. I'm testing it, so it's definitely come a long ways. Any others?
And David?
Yeah, and it could go across the speakers. In resistance training, the concept of a repetition failure is become quite provocative. Is it required or not required to promote adaptations and gains? And I wonder in the endurance area with monitoring, are people moving in that direction of understanding failure So it's a power output for a given duration an athlete can do, but as he tries to do it now, he can't. It's a failure, essentially. And is that a very significant event that we should try to understand for understanding adaptations? And is anyone trying to attack that area?
One of you?
Well, this is a really good point in terms of performance. This is what I tried to suggest when I said that sometimes we need data information tests in fatigue. Because there's, especially in roll cycling, there are some phases which are well, for everybody. But later on, when those stronger do like this on a motorbike, it's finished for most of them. And we should try to make more advances in this kind of tests to detect these situations. So, great point.
I'm just going to follow up. We tried at the Tour Down Under asking people retrospectively. They'd see the course profile in their data, and we'd say, where was the toughest, the hardest part of the race? With a red pin, you just circle, go back to the hardest part of the race. And of course, as you'd expect, up climbs at the end of races, you know, there's the lead out. You'd expect high power, high perception of effort. But there's another domain that opens up, and it's very low power, but extraordinarily high effort. It usually comes after a climb, or crosswinds, or gutters, all the most miserable times of a ride, when you're pretty much tired and you're barely hanging on and groveling. And my sensations, my perception is that those actually have big impact on fatigue and recovery. Those low power output, destroyed perception of effort might become an interesting part of helping manage them.
I think the most important, and it has to do also with the role of the cyclist in the team. Sometimes if I need to push hard in the first part or in some specific phase, maybe I must take caffeine not at the end of the race, because my role, I have to make my best before. So everything is in racing is so complex system that is smashing.
If I just made one further comment, David, just in keeping with my part of the presentation, I'd say we probably have the capacity to answer that question from the data that we've already gathered, but we need to look afresh at that data to pick it out. So we're looking for the points in the race, as you say, where that happens, but then looking to see what happens to the progression in that athlete's training over time. And we can then start to dissect out, does it correspond with those athletes that appear to push themselves to the limit repeatedly? Or do athletes that leave something in reserve seem to progress better, which I think is implicit in your question. And I think if we can start to interrogate our data sets, we can actually dissect that out now. Thank you very much. So just one final piece of housekeeping, which is to let you know